And all of this, please stay with us as well, Doctor, as we continue the conversation. All of this is a question of presidential leadership and the need for the American people to get facts at a time of a pandemic, crisis, and considerable fear. That brings me back to a conversation I wish I didn't have to have here. But Peter Alexander of NBC News was asking a very legitimate question about the issue I just talked with Sanjay about. The president's very optimistic talk yesterday and again today that there would be therapeutic drugs available to patients immediately. Game-changing. Now, that's what the president said. Of course, his own chief infectious disease, Dr. Tony Fauci, disagrees with him. The president, instead of answering that question, and then Peter Alexander said, talk to the American people out there who are at home, who are frightened. Give them some advice. Instead of offering that advice and that comfort, the president did this.
What do you say to the Americans who are scared, though? I guess nearly 200 dead, 14,000 who are sick, millions, as you witnessed, who are scared right now. What do you say to Americans who are watching you right now who are scared?
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say. Go ahead.
I
think it's a very nasty question, and I think it's a very bad signal that you're putting out to the American people. The American people are looking for answers, and they're looking for hope. And you're doing sensationalism. And the same with NBC and Comcast.
So
I don't call it Comcast. I call it Concast. Let me just for whom you work. Let me just tell you something. That's really bad reporting. And you ought to get back to reporting instead of sensationalism. Let's see if it works. It might and it might not. I happen to feel good about it, but who knows? I've been right a lot. Let's see what happens.
I sat in that room for just shy of 10 years. It was a perfectly valid question, and what the president did to Peter Alexander is reprehensible. The American people are looking for answers. They do want hope. They do want support, Mr. President. That was a very fair question. Our Caitlin Collins is in the briefing room right now. She was there for that contentious briefing. Caitlin, this is a Trump trademark. This is a Trump trademark. It was striking that this came, this, forgive me, bullshit attack on fake news came just moments after the Secretary of State said the American people need to be careful about where they get their information and go to sources they can trust. I get there are at times disagreements. There are at times contention between politicians and reporters. That was a 100% legitimate question with no hype, no shade, no bias. He just wanted to attack.
Yeah, and we're living in a pandemic, and people have questions, and they want to hear messages from the President of the United States. And so that was the question that was posed to him, and that's how he answered it. And we should note that just, a few moments ago, the Vice President was asked the same question. He responded very differently, instead telling Americans to be vigilant. He did not have any issues with that question the way that the President did. And of course, that comes as the President, had been facing this initial criticism over how his administration has responded to the coronavirus. And that's why you've seen him coming out here every day this week, trying to put a public face on the response to this. And so that's why I just raised the questions, is that really what the president should be focusing on when there are questions here about testing, ventilators, masks, so many questions that Americans actually care about, whether or not they can leave their homes. Should they be concerned about a lockdown happening in their communities, since you're seeing some of these happening in California and in New York? That was actually something we did get a response to while we were here in this room for about over an hour. The president said he does not feel that some kind of federal shutdown is necessary. That has been something that a million people have been asking about, these questions on whether or not they're going to also not be able to leave their home unless it's for necessary travel. Right now, they said that is not the case, John. That came as they did say they are going to be shutting down non-essential travel between the United States and Mexico. That's a move they took a few days ago with Canada. But John, I do want to point to another source of confusion here in the briefing room, and that was over this Defense Production Act. That's this act that the president had signed this week that would essentially grant him the power to direct private companies to ramp up their production of these things that you are seeing doctors and nurses say they are in desperately short supply of. Ventilators, masks, all of these things that they say they need to treat coronavirus patients, and they don't have, or they don't have enough of them. The president caused a lot of confusion because he said he actually had invoked it last night. Yesterday he had clarified and said he had not pulled the trigger on it yet. He had simply signed it and it was sitting there ready for him to use when he wanted it. But then he seemed to say later that he wasn't requiring companies to actually ramp up production, which is what the act would do. Otherwise, it's just them volunteering to do it. But when we pressed him for clarification on exactly whether or not he was signing it and using it, the president did not offer that clarification. So, John, we're walking away from this still not knowing exactly what is happening with the Defense Production Act. And it means a lot. It may seem a little, in the weeds in Washington for those watching at home, but it means a lot because it could mean some of these companies having to make a lot more ventilators now, a lot more face masks now, all of these supplies that these people say they are going to need for this crush of coronavirus patients that they're expecting to get.